The Pennine Way, 268 miles from Edale to Kirkjutholm in 18 days. At the beginning of June 2018, my sister Jenny and I danced triumphantly into Kirkjutholm at the completion of our 18-day journey along the Pennine Way. It had been the most amazing adventure, tough in the extreme at times, but so worthwhile, completed in 3 stages during 3 successive years. We experienced everything that the Pennines can throw at you: torrential rain, howling gales, thick mist, stunning beauty, steamy hot days, gorgeous wild flowers, days of complete solitude when we didn't see a single soul, fierce 4-legged beasties, dogs, cows and horses, interesting people with great stories to tell, and the best workout in the world. Our adventure started in June 2016, when we spent one glorious, amazing week walking the first third of the backbone of Britain, 100 miles from Edale to Horton in Ribblesdale. It was a greater challenge than we had ever bargained for. People had warned us that it was tough, but we didn't really believe them until we tried it ourselves. Our first day involved walking 16 miles in torrential rain with 2 major climbs, getting off track in the mist and thrashing around in a peat bog, but somehow, amazingly, we did it. We thought that if we cracked day 1, it would be plain sailing after that, but each day was equally challenging in its own right. And we had the most fantastic adventures en route, walking for days in almost splendid isolation through beautiful unspoilt countryside and meeting loads of interesting people in the pubs in the evenings after the rigours of each day. Perhaps it should be compulsory for all politicians to climb a mountain or go on a long-distance walk before they take up office. Maybe the world would be a better place if they did. Then, in June 2017, and despite truly foul weather most days, we spent the most fantastic 8 days walking the central section, 120 miles, picking up where we had left off the previous year in Horton in Ribblesdale, and continuing to Greenhead on Hadrian's Wall. Our journey featured more encounters with many delightful people and some hilarious episodes with gates. We completed the final stage in June 2018, walking 80 miles from Greenhead to Kirkjutholm through the vast Northumbrian wilderness and the Cheviot Hills. Sadly, our photos don't really capture the wild vastness of this stunningly beautiful part of the British countryside. It is so out of civilization. Again, we walked all day, each day, with no sounds or signs of humanity for miles around, except for one memorable incident, accompanied by the sound of birdsong, especially skylarks, and the gentle wind. Total bliss. The weather was very hot and humid, but no rain. Almost unprecedented conditions on the Pennine Way. A few nerdy facts. The full route contains 249 timber stiles, 183 stone stiles, 204 bridges, and 287 gates. There are 458 signs marking the route. The total ascent over the whole route is 39,370 feet. The highest point is Crossfell at 2,930 feet. Wainwright wrote, "You won't come across me anywhere along the Pennine Way. I've had enough of it. The terrible weather often encountered on the Pennine Way may have been the reason why. One of the world's toughest endurance races, the Montane Spine Race, is held in January and June each year, when completely bonkers ultra runners compete to run the course in less than 7 days. See below for more information. During that time, they barely sleep, barely eat, and carry all their own gear. For many years, the record for the fastest completion of the Pennine Way was held by Mike Hartley, who ran the entire course in July 1989 in just over 65 hours. His record was finally broken, first by John Kelly in 2020, then a few weeks later by Damien Hall, and then most recently once again by John Kelly in 2021. Highlights. Some of the most dramatic sights on the Pennine Way come thick and fast, between Middleton in Teesdale and Dufton. We knew they were coming because we had read about them in the guidebook, but we were not prepared for their sheer dramatic beauty. Here they are in the order we saw them. Low force on the River Tees. Wow, we said as we walked past on the opposite bank to all the tourists. High force on the River Tees. Wow and double wow, we said, as we again walked past all the tourists who were pouring across the river from the car park on the other side. Cauldron Snout. Even more wows here, particularly because there are no roads anywhere near and consequently no tourists. The only way to get there is to walk a long way. After eating our lunch at the bottom, we summoned up the courage to climb the rocks on the right-hand side of the waterfall, the only way to navigate past this marvel of nature. High Cup Nick, a dramatic U-shaped glaciated valley and part of the Wynn Sill, a vast sheet of dolerite which lies beneath much of northeast England, located about 3 miles to the east of Dufton. This deep chasm is one of the wonders of northern England. High Cup Nick. Wow doesn't even come close to describing this breathtaking natural miracle. As you approach across the fells, there are no signs of what is about to hit you. I remember being completely blown away as we approached the edge and the chasm opened up before us. Never have I seen anything so marvellous. In my experience, it vies for first place with the Victoria Falls for being the 8th wonder of the world. Other beauty spots. Malham Cove, a large curved limestone scar and well-known beauty spot in the Yorkshire Dales. It has been used as the location for many films, including Wuthering Heights and Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. Malham Tarn, a glacial lake and one of only 8 upland alkaline lakes in Europe. Blackstone Edge, where we had a delightful chat with a local group of 6 octogenarians who make an annual trip to the Edge every year on the same date. It just happened to be the day we were there, to celebrate their lifelong friendship. Most extreme. Bad weather is no stranger to those brave souls who were mad enough to try walking the Pennine Way, and we had some of the worst on 4 of the Pennine Way's major fells. The Pennine Way kicks off with a steep climb up the notorious Jacob's Ladder, skirting the summit of Kinder Scout. Conditions were treacherous as we ascended the steps in torrential rain and gale-force winds. This photo, looking back on the first part of the ascent, makes it all look quite innocent, but the second one gives a more realistic impression of the appalling weather throughout our first day. Great Shunnafell, 2,349 feet. One of the monster fells on the Pennine Way between Hawes and Keld. Another day of tempestuous weather, driving rain, winds approaching hurricane force, and thick mist. However, although we had to dig deep to conquer this challenge, our spirits were high and we were actually enjoying ourselves. This photo of us at the summit says it all. As we were climbing towards the peak, we met a group of young people on a Duke of Edinburgh Award Scheme expedition coming down towards us. They were in a miserable state. One of them had lost the sole from one of his boots, and his friends were trying to help him to tie it back on with a piece of string. We really felt for them. Crossfell, 2,930 feet. Another monster, and the highest point on the Pennine Way. We knew the weather was going to be bad, and we were in two minds about even attempting the hazardous crossing. But circumstances conspired to decide the issue for us. Jenny was suffering from a horrendous blister on one of her heels, aggravated by a Compeed plaster ripping off all the skin, and we knew she would have problems walking that day. So she decided to travel to Garrigill, where we were staying that night, by alternative means. I, however, was very keen to give it a go. I am eternally grateful to Linda and Terry, two stalwart, experienced walkers who we had met previously on the trail, who asked me if I would like to join them on the traverse. It would, after all, be safety in numbers. As luck would have it, Jenny had her own adventures that day as she teamed up with Bob, the local baggage carrier, when he arrived to pick up our bags, and spent the day helping him on his rounds. He was apparently huge fun and a mine of local knowledge, and Jenny is a wonderful storyteller, so they kept each other hugely entertained throughout the day. Meanwhile, I set off with my two companions in the pouring rain. The weather was so bad, a repeat of Great Shunnafell conditions, only worse, that we only managed to take one quick photo when we reached the summit. The peak of Crossfell has a reputation for being notoriously difficult to navigate off in bad weather, and that is exactly what happened to us. We spent 15 minutes casting back and forth, trying to find the descent in the mist. Sheep looked like rocks, and rocks looked like sheep, and there were absolutely no distinguishing features to help us find the path. We were kicking ourselves, because although we had a compass, it was somewhere at the bottom of my rucksack and almost impossible to extract due to the strong winds and torrential rain. We were starting to get desperate because Terry was showing signs of suffering from the debilitating cold, despite all his layers, and we knew we wouldn't survive much longer up there if we couldn't find the path. We were saved by the OS app which Terry had downloaded to Linda's mobile phone the previous evening. This is a wonderful gadget and something which I have used ever since on my walks. It shows you exactly where you are in relation to the trail and consequently enables you to get back on track if you deviate from the path. Using the app, we managed to successfully navigate our way back to the trail and reach the safety of Greg's hut on the descent. Our experience was a harsh lesson in fell safety and shows how easy it is to get into trouble, even for experienced walkers, and how essential it is to be suitably equipped for all eventualities. Penny Ghent, 2,277 feet. This is the sight that met us across the valley as we came round Fountains Fell. Our hearts sank into our boots as it started to dawn on us that we would have to climb that towering giant in order to reach Horton in Ribblesdale on the other side. On the summit of Pennine, the wind was so strong that we had trouble staying on our feet. Shortly afterwards, just as we reached the bottom and were blown into Horton in Ribblesdale, the heavens opened, and we felt very grateful that we had made it across relatively unscathed. Hadrian's Wall. The Pennine Way runs along Hadrian's Wall for about 8.5 miles before it branches off to head northwards across the remote Northumberland National Park towards Bellingham. We diverted off the trail to visit the Vindolanda Roman Fort, Museum and Archaeological Site. This was well worth the detour and is highly recommended. Thirlwall Castle, Greenhead, built in the 12th century on the line of Hadrian's Wall, using stones taken from the wall. At the conclusion of our second stage in Greenhead, we visited the Roman Army Museum, which is located nearby, and found it to be far more interesting than we expected. We learnt that it took 15,000 men 6 years to build the 73-mile-long wall, which also served as the inspiration for the wall in George Martin's Game of Thrones. It is thought that it was originally painted white, making it an even more imposing sight to invaders from the north. Snippets from Hadrian's Wall. Heading along Hadrian's Wall. Descending into Sycamore Gap. Descending into Sycamore Gap and towards the famous sycamore tree, which so sadly is no longer there, following an act of mindless vandalism committed in September 2023. We are so glad that we were able to see this beautiful, iconic tree while it was still growing there. Previously, it was said to be the most photographed tree in England. It was also called the Robin Hood tree, after it featured in the film Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. The sycamore tree in its heyday. I just had to give the tree a cuddle when we cruised past. This is the point where the Pennine Way leaves Hadrian's Wall and heads north across the stile in the middle of the photo. Most hilarious. As we approached Hawes, we had to negotiate another one of those rather quaint methods devised for climbing over dry stone walls. In other words, a stile with a small gate on top of it. Jenny was in the lead, but after climbing the stile, she seemed to be having problems with opening the gate on the top. "I can't open this, Trish," she said. "You have a go." So I had a go, but it simply wouldn't budge. We started debating our options for getting across, because the alternative was to walk a very long way round, when suddenly the gate swung open on the other side, with me clinging onto it for dear life as I dangled over the precipice on the other side of the wall. We had been trying to open it on the hinged side. Once I managed to swing back to safety, we absolutely collapsed with laughter at our comical mistake. As we descended the steep slope into Hebden Bridge at the end of day 3, we could see that we would have a steep climb out again the next morning. We also knew that our competition, 2 walkers who we had been thrashing each day, were staying in the same place that night and would be making the same ascent the next morning. We were determined not to let our sea-to-sea reputation as the speedy girls slip and lose our edge, so we shot off after breakfast at breakneck speed to make sure that we would be in the lead right from the start of the day. This is not the sort of attitude that we would recommend to other walkers, but Jenny and I are naturally competitive and simply can't help ourselves. We spent the first hour slogging our way up the hill and then walked happily all morning until, horror of horrors, we saw 2 walkers in the far distance ahead of us across the moor. As we got closer, our suspicions were confirmed. They were the competition. We simply couldn't understand how on earth they had managed to get ahead of us. Just then they turned round, saw us coming, and speeded up. Well, the race was on. When we eventually caught up with them at Top Withens, they looked rather sheepish. We asked them if they had been travelling on the wings of angels, and they shamefully admitted that they had taken a taxi up the hill in Hebden Bridge because they couldn't face the steep ascent. We all had a good laugh about it and sat down in the heather together to eat our respective lunches. Lunch spot at Top Withens, a ruined farmhouse near Haworth, which is believed to have been the inspiration for Emily Bronte's novel Wuthering Heights. This is where we sat down for lunch with the competition. The Hadrian's Wall to Bellingham stage passes through some of the remotest terrain I have ever walked in, open moors and deep, dark forests. We didn't see a soul all morning as we slowly made our way through the Stygian gloom, imagining trolls lurking behind the trees, just waiting for the sun to release them from their petrified state so that they could grab us for dinner. Just as we were leaving Walk Forest behind and about to emerge onto the moors, I decided that it was time for a pit stop. Don't even need to find a friendly bush here, Jen, 'cause we're not like to be disturbed, I announced. I had just squatted down with my knickers round my ankles when I heard a rustling sound behind me, and the fell runner popped out of the forest. I don't know who was more surprised. He probably hadn't expected to see anyone else either, especially a middle-aged lady with her knickers down. He was the only other person we saw all day. What are the chances of something like that happening? Needless to say, we all had a good laugh about it. The Paramo Kids. We jokingly referred to ourselves as the Paramo Kids after we made the mistake, or maybe it was a quirk of fortune, of walking into the outdoor shop in Hawes at the end of our first day on the second section of the trail. 2 identical Paramo jackets just happened to leap off the racks onto our poor defenceless bodies, making a huge hole in our finances in the process. But in retrospect, this was probably one of the best purchases I have ever made. Our lovely new jackets immediately started doing the job they were created for as we left Hawes in the rain to start our challenging hike over Great Shunner Fell. Most inspiring. I first heard about the Spine when we were taking shelter in Greg's hut after our dramatic hike over Crossfell. The hut was being manned by marshals who were waiting for the competitors to start coming through, and they kindly offered us a very welcome cup of tea. We were fascinated to hear all about the extreme nature of this epic, brutal event. Jenny and I were hoping that we would catch a glimpse of them racing past us, but we never saw any of them because they overtook us during the night while we were sleeping. In January 2019, the Winter Spine Race was won for the first time by a woman, Jasmine Paris, who ran the entire race in just under 3.5 days. Not only did she win, but she smashed the previous record by a massive 12 hours. To put that into perspective, it took Jenny and I 18 days to complete our own Pennine Way adventure. Many other records were broken that year too, and the dramas and events which occurred during the 7 days which these amazing athletes have to complete the course were exciting in the extreme. Such a shame that their incredible achievements are barely known outside trail running circles. Jenny and I felt very privileged to meet one of the Spine heroes, Mark Denby, while we were staying at the Forest View Walkers Inn in Burness, a marvellous institution in its own right, towards the end of our walk. We were sitting in the lounge, chatting to other walkers and swapping stories about ticks and other walking trivia, when a chap with black toenails padded in and quietly sat down. He told us that he was doing a recce for the summer spine race, the Spine Fusion, and that he was aiming to catch a bus in Kirk Yetholm at 1 o'clock the next day after running across the Cheviots from Burness. Our jaws dropped, because that was a distance which it would take us 2 days to walk. During supper that evening, we all quizzed Mark about what makes a spiner tick, and were fascinated by his every word. When we signed the book in the Border Hotel in Kirk Yetholm 2 days later, we saw his name there. He had made it in plenty of time for the 1 o'clock bus. We later learnt that he went on to run the Spine Fusion that year in an incredible 3 days, 6 hours and 4 minutes, setting a new record for the summer spine. On our first day, as we were ascending Jacob's Ladder, we met a father and son team from America who were planning to walk the entire distance together as a sort of father and son bonding exercise. Over the course of our first week, we kept bumping into them as they were doing the same course as us, and often staying in the same B&Bs. We learnt that the father would have his 70th birthday on the trail, and that his son, who was 17, was carrying rocks in his rucksack because he wanted more of a challenge. We can only hope that we are as fit as the father when we reach the age of 70. They were a total inspiration. Highest pub in Britain. The 17th century Tan Hill Inn, the highest pub in Britain at 1,732 feet above sea level. The Cheviots. The Windy Gyle Trig Point, Russell's Cairn, about halfway between Burness and Kirk Yetholm. Typical Cheviot scenery en route to Lamb Hill. Our final day on the trail, on the descent from Owchope Cairn to Hen Hole and the Shill in the background. Another great example of the starkly beautiful Cheviot scenery. The Shill, the final hurdle, just 5 miles away from Kirk Yetholm. Flora and fauna. Heartsease growing on the trail near High Force. Heartsease has been used traditionally for speeding up the metabolism, soothing sore throats, reducing whooping cough symptoms, and treating constipation and skin complaints. Bistort growing just outside Burness. The highly astringent bistort has traditionally been used for treating wounds and digestive problems, particularly diarrhea. Cotton grass, which is also highly astringent and has traditionally been used for treating diarrhea. Horses grazing along the River Aire between Gargrave and Malham. Beech trees on the Gargrave to Malham stage. Orchids on the Gargrave to Malham stage. Beautiful cottage garden in Appleby. Due to a lack of accommodation in Dufton, we stayed in Appleby, a charming Cumbrian market town and home to the famous Gypsy Horse Fair. Stone sheep along the River Tees near Low Force. Wild ponies on Paden Hill on the Bellingham to Burness stage. Lessons learnt. The Pennine Way kills boots, as evidenced by all the dead boots piled up at the finishing post in Kirk Yetholm. Never, never underestimate the extremes of weather that the Pennine Way can throw at you. It is absolutely essential to ensure that you always have a compass with you and know how to use it. Electronic navigation devices are all well and good, but if you lose the signal, and that can often happen in out-of-the-way places, you are doomed unless you have a good old-fashioned compass to hand. The eighth wonder of the world, and a few more besides, is located on the Pennine Way.